Welcome to our online Q&A forum number 2 from the Maiwar electorate office. I'm Michael Berkman, the Greens MP for Maiwar in the Queensland Parliament. Really appreciate that anyone who's online at the moment, has taken the time to tune in for this new way of doing business throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown that's followed. So I want to begin this evening, as we always must, by acknowledging that I'm here in Yagara and Turrbal country. I want to acknowledge and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and emerging leaders. And wherever you might be on this continent this evening, we are all living and we work and we meet on stolen country. No First Nation sovereignty was ever ceded, and so we are all on stolen land. Look, it's particularly important today on Sorry Day, National Sorry Day, to acknowledge past wrongs and injustices too. So today marks 23 years since the tabling of the Bringing Them Home report in the federal parliament, which was reported back on the federal parliamentary inquiry into the stolen generations. And so these occasions are so important, as in recognition of Sorry Day and commemoration of the tabling of that report. It's so important to first of all wrap our heads around just how brutal the colonisation of this country was, and how the systematic and lawful oppression and marginalisation of First Nations people went on for so many years and until so recently. And it's also really important for us to frame in that context how we move forward and how we move towards really meaningful shifts towards justice and treaty for First Nations people, because until we're prepared as a nation to stare straight at that truth of our history and be honest with ourselves and each other about it, we're going to have a hard time moving forward. Now, just a quick explainer. I guess everyone probably gets why we're doing this. We're still, although we feels now like we're emerging out the other side of all the lockdown measures, we're still pretty constrained in what we can do. So the usual pop-up offices that I would hold and meetings with constituents here in the electorate office, a whole bunch of other public events that we might have held at this time, we simply can't. So this is the alternative. Maybe, for better or worse. In some respects, I'm sure it's much easier for folks to tune in wherever you are, but I would like to see some real people at some point in the future. But anyway, this is the way we have to do it for the time being. The last time we held one of these, it was an excellent opportunity to hear from a variety of folks around Maiwar and around the state, as I understand it, to hear what matters to them and to, I guess, give you an update on what I know of what's happening around the electorate, what's going on in terms of government response to COVID-19, and all manner of other things. The office is, for the time being, still closed. We're hoping that that'll change very soon, but it's not entirely clear exactly when we'll be back up and running at full tilt again. So, but even at that point, we won't be able to have meetings here. So for the time being, this remains the way that we'll go about doing things. Now, I would love to get as many questions from you as I can. We've got a few that people have asked ahead of this live Q&A, so we can start off with those ones. But please get your questions in the little comments box. I think we're streaming on both Facebook and on YouTube, and either of those platforms should have a comments box. So get your questions in there, and if you can, just so that it feels a little more personal, so that we're not just little online windows. Let us know where you're from, whether that's your town or a suburb, just so that we can contextualise who you are and what it is you're interested in. I'm going to be answering questions for about an hour, give or take. It kind of depends on how much interest there is, how many questions keep coming in. I'll try and get through as many as I can. So I guess without further introductory waffle, I might as well just get on to the first questions. But look, again, don't hold back. Give me all your questions. Let me know what you want to know. I'll pick up what I can, and we'll get through as much as we possibly can in the next hour-ish, 55 minutes. Okay, question number 1. Questions in advance. We've got Bron from Indrapilli has asked, is it reasonable for the planning law to exclude the community from being involved in further amendments to an already approved development application. Now, Bron gave a whole bunch of extra detail in the question, and this relates to the Tallows townhouse development, which is just over the freeway in Indooroopilly. And look, the short answer to the question, Bron, is no. I think there's any number of not just changes to developments, but also a whole lot of developments that are really, really substantial, like really big developments that affect a community in huge ways immediately and in the long term, where the community doesn't get a meaningful say. There's code accessible developments that if they sit within a neighbourhood plan or a planning scheme, or they match the criteria closely enough, the community doesn't get a say. And we think that's entirely unacceptable. I think the capacity to get an approval and then change from where that, what that approval was without community input and without locals getting a real say, it also shouldn't happen. And there's not, this isn't a lone example. We've got a really big development at St Lucia on Macquarie Street, 160 Macquarie Street as well, where I think it's from, going back almost 10 years now, about 2011, when, the development application was first made. And we've just seen change after change after change, where it kind of keeps morphing and scaling up and changing into something that's completely different from what it was when it received the initial approval. And when these changes can be pigeonholed as minor changes, the community gets no say whatsoever. No, that shouldn't be the case. Our planning system should be overhauled in a number of different ways to give community much more of a say in what development is approved, and also in what our planning instruments actually say is appropriate for a particular neighbourhood or a city. It's a real double-edged sword, though, because when those instruments like neighbourhood plans don't actually, they don't have a binding effect on council's decisions in approving development, it creates a real disincentive for people to be involved in developing those. But that's just one aspect of the planning system that we say needs to be really dramatically overhauled. And that's been our policy for a long while now, is that we need to see a root and branch reform of the planning system that returns power to communities, to have a real say over the shape of what development happens and what our community looks like in years to come. That's probably enough answer for that question, but I am going to also flag that we are planning at this stage to have an online planning forum on the 13th of June. So keep an eye out on my Facebook page for details of that once we've confirmed. Pretty sure at this stage it will be 13 June. But yeah, please jump online and get involved with that. We'll have some real expert knowledge and some locals who have been paying attention to the planning issues around Maiwar for a long time now. So it should be a great event. Now, Roxanne has asked a question from Facebook. She's asked, what's the newly elected BCC regime doing to progress timing around winding up the Mount Cootha quarry, please? And how can the state local government minister be encouraged to get some progress on making them comply with the original mandate to develop into community amenity spaces? Look, I guess that's a great question. Thanks, first of all, for asking, Roxanne. We know that there's been a lot of really great work done in this space by a bunch of locals. I did answer a question on this last time, so I'll try and keep it brief. But Phil Best gets a special shout out. He always does. He's been doing incredible investigative work around the quarry for such a long time now. But now, along with the Mount Cootha Protection Alliance, they've been doing some great work and some future visioning work about what the quarry could look like. Because, as you referred to in your question, the council committed back in the city plan, so the current Brisbane City Council planning scheme, which I think is dated 2014, it had proposed that the council would stop using the quarry by 2025, but by 2015 they would start a process of public consultation to work out what the community wanted to do with that space. So far, we've seen nothing in terms of consultation, and council appears ready to renege on its commitment to close the quarry by 2025. And actually, I remember last time I picked up a letter that's still sitting right here that says they have no intention of closing the quarry anytime soon. So, look, it's disappointing, but I suppose this is why groups like Mount Cootha Protection Alliance and any locals who care about the future of the quarry and the amenity of this part of town, get in touch with council and let them know you're not happy with that, because the honest truth is that they've made this commitment in the city plan. They should be held to it. But in pure financial terms, they're keeping the quarry open because they're still spending a little bit of money from it, or they're saving money where they might otherwise have to buy aggregate. But the flip side of that is that every year that they carry on mining this place without a rehabilitation plan, the cost of rehabilitation increases. So the cost to us as ratepayers in Brisbane is only getting worse over time. So we need to keep our voices up. I think we've done a great job. I'm really proud of the way that we've been able to work with the community from my office to shine a light on this issue, to get some focus on it, and to, in the long term, I think we can get council to stick to this commitment to a 2025 closure. I'm really excited about what could happen with that space too. So, all right, moving on. Next question. Thanks again, Roxanne. Love that question. Where are we now? Okay, next question is from Tanya in Toowong. Are you aware of the exponential increase in the crime rate in Toowong in the last 4 to 5 weeks? There have been 91 offences in Toowong in the last month, mostly drug and theft related. Do you know why that may be? ... Does it concern you that a suburb in your electorate is becoming a crime hotspot? What are you planning to do about it? Look, thanks for the question, Tanya. It is obviously a really big issue in the electorate, and one that I've been devoting an extraordinary amount of time to trying to address. We've had plenty of people get in touch with the electorate office about it, and you haven't named it in your question, but I'll go straight to the point. We're talking about the supported accommodation at Atira, what was student accommodation on Glen Road in Toowong. For those who don't have the background, the State Housing Minister made a decision, dropped this decision very quietly on Good Friday, that they'd be moving people from other supported accommodations in Spring Hill and in West End into Atira. And so these are people who are getting support with various needs, whether those are, mental health issues or drug and alcohol abuse issues, people who are fleeing domestic and family violence. There are a whole host of reasons people are getting this support from organisations like St Vincent de Paul and Mission Australia, Brick Housing. And one of the key supports that they're obviously getting through these organisations as well is trying to find secure long-term housing. But as an interim measure, the accommodation they were in wasn't appropriate to allow these folks to observe physical distancing. So the government made a snap decision to move a bunch of folks into the building at Toowong. So I think up to 300 residents is what we've heard. Now, your question is very directly, am I aware that there have been these 91 offences? Well, look, to be perfectly frank, my repeated requests to the officer in charge, despite having some direct dialogue with them early in the piece, we haven't been able to get a meeting with them. I've made countless requests to the Housing Minister for them to provide more assistance, more support to the folks who are living in Atira, and to provide the assistance they need immediately, but also keep working on those long-term housing solutions. And I've been stonewalled by the Minister as well. So look, all I can do is give you my word that I'm doing everything I possibly can to keep getting this information. I actually put a question on notice in Parliament last week, which was the first opportunity I've had since this issue came to light to do that. So now the Housing Minister is at least compelled by parliamentary rules to respond to that question. But look, rest assured, when I get more information, I'll be putting it out to the community. I don't honestly know what the extent of any changes are, but I sympathise with you, and I'm sorry that your experience is, whether it's 91 incidents or however many it might be, that you're feeling this change in your community. And you have my word that I'm doing all I can on that front. Okay, thanks for the question, Tanya. It's not, it's not an easy issue for you or any number of other locals, and it's something that we've been working really hard on. So I appreciate you bringing it to the fore. Sufi from Facebook has asked, what is the importance of having Greens representation in state parliament for meaningful action on climate change? Your Liberal opponent is running with vague support for renewables, but both major parties haven't followed through with meaningful investment. Look, that's again an excellent question. I guess it's important to zoom out a little bit and consider the sorts of change that we've seen from the government in the time that I've been elected, and even before I was elected. We've kind of got to view it through the lens of a threat to the establishment, to establishment politics, is what makes change as much as anything else. The simple fact, as you've referred to in your question, that we've now got an LNP candidate who's running in a seat held by the Greens is proposing publicly owned renewable energy. This is not something that you could imagine the LNP having actively campaigned on before there was a real threat from the Greens. Making them follow through with that obviously just requires a kind of doggedness. But I feel like, to be honest, the electorate office has done a good job. This is one of the benefits of being on the crossbench, is that no matter who comes out in government next time round, we can hold them to account on commitments that they've made locally and commitments that they've made statewide. Because we're not constrained by I guess, the winds of change and the kinds of populist flip-flopping that we often see from the big parties. And look, I think I can say with my hand in my heart that we have had a really significant impact on the way, government policy has gone over time. We've seen, changes to, marriage equality is one of the classic examples where we were the long-term advocates saying that we needed to see change. The Royal Commission into banking, that's straight from the Greens policy playbook, and it happened only because we were persistent and dogged in our advocacy for it. Queensland's got a Human Rights Act, which we've been advocating for since time immemorial. The state government finally banning developer donations is a huge step in the right direction. It's obviously not all the way there, but we've still got commitments from Labor to put caps on electoral spending and on donations. They've introduced legislation. We're waiting for them to actually follow through and just legislate that. It's not perfect, but it's better than nothing. And things like improvements to renters' rights, again, they've made the commitment. We still haven't even seen legislation on that one. So, look, we are pushing them along the way, but I suppose while they're still taking these massive donations from whatever corporate donors it might be, whether that's the gambling sector or the fossil fuel industry, we're still seeing them kowtow to these major corporate interests time and again. We've handed over a tenth of the CBD for the Queen's Wharf Casino site. We're seeing massive expansions in coal seam gas across the state still, at a time when we know we need to be urgently transitioning to renewables. So look, I guess, bring it right back around to the question at the start. We need representatives in Parliament who aren't representing those corporate interests, but who are actually representing good evidence-based policy. And I feel like that's what I offer as the lone Greens member in Parliament, and we could certainly do with more of us in there to make the case a little more vocally. Okay, thanks, Sue. Oh, there's another one from Sufi, which I'm going to ask because it's so topical today. I have to answer this one. She's asked, currently there are tens of thousands on the wait list for social housing in Queensland. As an urban planner who has worked on housing projects, the importance of protecting public housing models within the social housing scheme has never been clearer in light of COVID-19 or the economic environment. Do the Greens support protecting and expanding public housing? Yes. And I could leave the answer right there, but I won't, because this is such an important issue. And it relates back precisely to what we were saying, what I was discussing before around the difficulty that these folks in Toowong are having finding long-term secure housing. We've got a social housing waiting list now of 39,000 people in Queensland. Since I was elected in 2017, 10,000 people have been added to that list. It's just staggering that we can have that many people who are in need of supported housing. And yet the government has a housing plan, a 10-year housing plan from 2017 to 2027, which will actually see a decline in the proportion of social housing in the system. It's like the numbers in their plan will see social housing go from something like 3.7% down to almost 3%, closer to 3%. Compared to those 39,000 people waiting for social housing, this year the government proposes to build, I think it's 575 social homes. There's just no equivalence between the need and the action that the government's taking. So we've today announced our plan, which, as you put it in your question, it ties in a really important way with where we're at economically at the moment. we're right on the precipice of a recession, the likes of which most of us haven't imagined, let alone seen. So by making this massive investment in social housing, we can address the housing crisis and the economic crisis that we're facing simultaneously. So with the sort of investment that we're proposing, we can construct 25,000 social homes a year. We can address that social housing waiting list within just a couple of years and simultaneously create 20,000 jobs in construction. Because this is what's really interesting is that, we've made this announcement today. Just yesterday, the HIA came out, and the Master Builders Association as well, I understand, have made similar calls for this kind of stimulus through the construction industry. So it's not some wacko left field idea. And it's very similar to stimulus measures that we implemented during the GFC through COAG. So, this is something that has to happen. And I think it'd be a real shame for the Queensland government to miss this opportunity. We need the jobs. We need the homes. Let's just join the dots already. There's a real simplicity to this proposal. And I do hope the government will just take it up. Moving on. Thanks so much for your question, Sophie. Excellent. I love them both. I've got a question here from Jake, who sent something through on email. Last time you had a Q&A, I asked a question about cannabis legalisation, and you said you'd been fighting really hard for decriminalisation, which I'd like to say thank you for. I'm wondering if you have also been fighting for legalisation. Yes, I have been. Sorry, that's just a slip on my end. I guess it's very easy to misuse one of those terms for the other. But I guess, just for clarity, for those who maybe aren't on top of this area, decriminalisation is just taking personal drug use out of the criminal code, so it's no longer a criminal offence. Legalisation is the creation of a regulatory framework for whatever, but in this case, we're talking about cannabis. Now, we know there's a huge and growing body of research which tells us that that criminalisation of personal drug use it leads to the worst outcomes for all people. It's an expensive way to go about dealing with an issue that should properly be framed as a health issue. The war on drugs has failed abysmally. People haven't stopped using drugs, and it would be foolhardy for any government to think that just by chest beating and maintaining this tough on drugs rhetoric, that we're going to see any change to that. So, I guess we see legalisation as an effective way of dealing with both, the supply and demand side of drug use and harm minimisation through both of those avenues. I'd say you're probably aware, Jake, although I don't know, that there was a federal policy announcement going back a couple of years ago now. The Greens announced federally a proposal for legalisation of cannabis, which would create a regulated market for the sale of cannabis. Oversight by the Australian Cannabis Agency which was the organisation proposed to deal with that. I'm sorry, I'm just seeing I'm not paying attention to all of this as it happens, but I've just got a comment come through which says the evidence shows it's much cheaper and more efficient to treat drug abuse as a health issue, which is absolutely true. And look, we saw this. I think I referred to this when I answered the question last time. We saw this in the Productivity Commission's recent report. So this is, the Productivity Commission is not it's not a think tank of any persuasion. This is a body that the government tasked to look at the question of recidivism or repeat offending in Queensland. And they came back with really explicit recommendations to the government that we could save an extraordinary amount of money and we could achieve much better outcomes by not just decriminalising what they called low harm drugs, which included cannabis and MDMA, but if we were to not just decriminalise but legalise these, pull that money out of the black market and provide better health supports for people, we would see far better health outcomes and we would save an extraordinary amount of money, which is currently just being flushed down the toilet, policing it and criminalising people. This is the thing, is that there are, I should have looked at this report, because there are some pretty crazy stats in there about the number of people who are currently in Queensland prisons where their head offence, their most serious offence, is a drug-related offence, an offence for drug use, for personal use, which is just insane. So you put someone in prison, you lock them up for using drugs when they could have been dealt with through the health system. And what outcome do you expect there? I mean, clearly that's going to take people further down, a criminal path. It will actively criminalise them and get them embedded in those sorts of networks. So anyway, it's I'm rambling a little bit now because this is a bit of a pet topic of mine. But just finally on that, there was a petition that I sponsored that dealt with this question of legalisation. It was signed by more than 13,000 people. Now, in the last term of Parliament, getting more than 10,000 signatures would have required Parliament to debate this petition, but they changed those rules this time round. So unfortunately, we didn't get to have that debate. We simply got a written response from the acting minister this time, the acting Attorney General, that is. And the response was just to say, no, we've already responded to the Productivity Commission's report. We have no intention of reviewing drug legislation or regulation anytime soon, which is hugely disappointing. It's, this is the classic example of policy flying in the face of the best evidence we have. And I think we're fast getting to the point where just about everyone in some way has had someone in their lives who's been affected by substance abuse. And I think we all recognise that these are just people like us. They're people we love, people we care about, and they're people who need support to deal with addiction, because it's we can't continue to pretend that drugs are just going to magically disappear, or that we're going to be able to, law and order our way past this problem. So yeah, that's a really good question, Jake. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to elaborate, to disentangle questions of decriminalisation and legalisation. Moving on, I've got, so this is probably a good time actually. Before I move on, first of all, I've got a question from Heather on here, which says, is it possible to see the report on drug use? Yes, I will take a note here that we'll put in the comments section at the end of this. We'll put a link to the Productivity Commission's report, because it is an interesting read. It goes into a lot more detail than just drug issues. It looks, it goes into quite a bit of detail looking at, a lot of the systemic underlying causes of overrepresentation of Aboriginal people in Queensland's prison system as well. So it's well worth the read. So we'll put that in there. This is also my opportunity to remind you to keep the questions coming. So pop your questions in the comments box, wherever they are. I'm trying to keep up as well as I can, but I'm sure I will miss some of them, but I'll do what I can to answer as many as possible along the way. So keep them coming. Tell us where you're from. I'm hoping to get through plenty more in the next 31 minutes. All right, moving on now. I've got a number of questions that came in from Padma via email before we started the Q&A. I don't have time to answer them all here, so I'm picking a couple, and I'll try and answer them together if that's all right. So Padma has asked, under COVID, the oil and gas companies have been doing dirty work as usual, and as usual, the Greens will go against. Are the Greens able to talk about new industries? And a related question, we're about to go into a recession. What plans do the Greens have to ensure people don't go hungry? Look, thank you for the question. Again, it's a really important one, and these are super important issues for us to consider, not just broadly, not just in the context of climate change, but in the context of COVID-19 and the economic turbulence that we're already feeling and that we know is not it's not going to be short and sharp. Like I said before, this is a recession like, or all indications are, all good money's on us seeing a recession like none in my lifetime, certainly. But it's so important to remember that there are dual crises that we're dealing with here, or even, three, if you can kind of roll the health crisis and the economic crisis that's precipitated into one, but then the climate crisis looms in the background. And there's no doubt that, we have a lot of work to do to provide a really clear vision for the future and a path forward. And this is, one of the, I guess it's an unfortunate reality. I've read a piece the other day that talked about how one of the only inevitabilities about crises like this is that they precipitate change, and I think the opportunities that we can harness at this point in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis are really important for us to keep focused on. So we're going to take an economic hit. Countries all over the world are, but it's exciting to think about how this shift in our economy, it's already being jumbled up in ways that we can't control or predict. But the possibilities for us to orchestrate a new economy on the way out of that, where we're really focused on green technologies. We know, there's no doubt, that Queensland in particular and Australia more generally is poised perfectly to be a real leader in green technologies globally, and not just in generation of solar and wind power. We are rich with the sorts of mineral resources that are required to produce those renewables technologies. And I think, while it might have been inconceivable 6 months ago that that the Prime Minister would be talking about domestic manufacturing and how we kind of return to the phrase was protecting our economic sovereignty. I think something along those lines, which is like double talk for how we actually need to get some manufacturing going back in the country again. I think it's so important that we have a really strong focus on our renewables capacity in that context. But look, there's no doubt as well that the COVID crisis is it mirrors in some ways the turning point that we were already at with coal communities and with these communities that are in the business of making thermal coal, and that over time we're inevitably going to have to phase that out. So a lot of the the ideas and the approaches to dealing with that transition are equally pertinent in the broader picture of the COVID crisis too, I think. So, and these are things that have now become achievable overnight. The sorts of stimulus that we've seen the federal government pouring out over the last couple of months has been staggering. Like free childcare is now a thing. That's something we need to hold on to really tight. But when in the context of transitioning workers and changing the economy, we need for free union TAFE to become a very real, tangible part of our daily lives and something we can expect. We do need rent-controlled social housing so that people have all got this stability and the security that we need to build a future. And federally, the Greens have been speaking more recently about a jobs guarantee. And we're talking green jobs here, but not green jobs in the way you might traditionally think of them. Let's remember that a nurse has a green job, a teacher has a green job. Anyone working in the care sector, sustainable construction is a green job. So this approach of building sustainable social housing is a really important path to that future where we can have people who are reskilled or shuffled around in the economy in ways that suit their existing skill set or their interests in retraining. Look, I hope I've more or less answered the question. So yeah, thanks for all of those questions, Padma, and I'm sorry I didn't get the opportunity to get through all of them, but it looks like we're on to the live questions now. So I've got a question from Gemma. Gemma's asked, "Hey Michael, can you update us on what's happening at the Quasmet Green Space and Community Garden?" Sure can. All right, this has been another big issue, particularly for folks around Toowong and Taringa. Quasmet, for those who don't know, the abbreviation is the Queensland Academy of Science, Maths and Technology. So it's the old Toowong High, the old Toowong Secondary College, just in on Bywong, between Bywong and Miskin Street. There's been a lot happening there over the last couple of years. The school's gone, it's a select entry school, so it doesn't take catchment kids. It's gone from being only a secondary school, so just taking 10 to 12 students, to now having a full cohort. So there's been big construction going on. There's been a lot of concern among the local community about potential impacts on this stretch of Toowong Creek, which is really, it's a beautiful and one of these really unusually pristine stretches of creek in such an urbanised area. But anyway, I digress. Back to what's happened most recently. as a consequence of the COVID-19 social distancing rules, apparently the school got instructions from the department to close down the Vera Street Community Garden and the commons next to it. So this is a little bit of land. It's a bit removed from the school. It's tucked away behind some houses. The gate on that was shut. So members of the community garden and all the folks that live around there that use that common space weren't able to. And simultaneously, there was a bunch of concern that erupted around the suggestion that the school might be fencing off all of its green space. So the ovals, anyone who knows the area knows that there's some big ovals there that are right along the creek. It's not just a beautiful big green space, but a really important thoroughfare for cyclists or pedestrians. Such a hilly part of the world, so that's the natural, the natural path to get through there. And it takes you directly from that back corner of Toowong and Taringa off the back end of Stanley Terrace all the way through to the river past BBC. So, look, last week we had a great outcomes. When the gate was shut, community was concerned about a fence going up around the entire oval. We started a petition. There were 1,000 signatures on the thing within just about 24 hours. And this all came very much out of the blue as well. I tried to do my due diligence right back in 2018 when this started and was asking questions of the school and the minister about what they would do to maintain access, particularly to the cycle route through the school, but also the green spaces. So that happened. Petition went up, got 1,000 signatures. The Vera Street Community Garden opened up the next day. But the really exciting forward-looking outcome, because that was only ever a temporary measure in response to social distancing needs and people gathering there apparently in contravention of the health directions. The exciting news is that the Minister for Education last week committed to maintain access to that green space and that no fence is going to go up at the school, certainly not before community consultation has happened. So there was one stretch on Miskin Street where a fence was actually being constructed last week, which quite fairly caused a bit of concern. The idea that right at that point immediately a fence could go up around the entire campus was a scary possibility. But that was just simply replacing an old fence that had to come down for construction. So we know now that there will be a third party come in to conduct some consultation with the community. We're already asking for feedback. I'd love to hear from you folks what it is that you value about that space if you live nearby, what you think is a good solution that meets the needs of the school to have some security. They've obviously got these new buildings and pretty incredible facilities there. So how to protect those, what's an appropriate place for a fence if there is going to be one around the buildings or parts of the green space. I know that there's a really strong inclination in the community to keep the green space, and I've got my own ideas about if they're going to fence, then fencing the buildings should be appropriate, should be adequate to protect those. But we will see what that consultation brings. I'll be super involved in it as much as I possibly can be, and I'd encourage everyone who lives around there and who's interested in that space. Okay, excellent. Thank you for the question, Gemma. Moving right along. I'm going to answer a question from Deanne in Toowong. The Crime and Corruption Commission in Queensland appears to have a poor reputation. What are your views, please? Why is nothing being done about public servants who act dishonestly and mislead during performing their duties? Great question, Deanne. And look, I guess I've got to start by saying that I have a lot of respect for the work that the CCC has done. But we need to recognise as well that they're working within very clear confines. The legislation that created the CCC and that gives them the power to investigate is really limited compared with, with what we might compare it with, for example, with ICAC in New South Wales. Its capacity to investigate corrupt conduct is nowhere near as broad as what ICAC is, for example. If I remember correctly, we're looking at Numenera changes that really did take some of the teeth out of the CCC. We need a CCC that has the powers of the New South Wales ICAC. which would give them scope to investigate not just conduct that meets the criminal definition of corrupt conduct, but looks much more broadly at, at any untoward dealings between the public service and politicians and anyone anywhere in society. So, look, I think there's plenty of scope for them to improve. Sorry, there's plenty of scope for us as legislators to improve what the CCC is empowered to do. I think within the remit they've been doing a good job, and we've seen, some of the recommendations and the really good work coming out of like Operation Belcara, for example, looking at local government corruption, flowing from the 2016 local government elections. That was great work. It's seen, a lot of criminal prosecution follow from it, and it's actually resulted in legislative change to ban developer donations. One interesting thing I'll raise just quickly before I move on is that while the CCC's remit is somewhat limited, there is scope for the Parliamentary Crime and Corruption Committee, so that's the parliamentary committee that oversees the CCC, to get the CCC to investigate anything in particular. They can set the terms of reference. And so I've been saying for a long time, given that, when these allegations of local government corruption were made and they were able to investigate, they did find direct links between developer donations and, they found the corruption, basically uncovered it. Given that we're still seeing these lawful donations being made by all and sundry other industries, everyone bar developers, I've suggested to the government that they, in concert with the opposition, if they make a bipartisan request of the CCC to investigate a particular issue, like, for example, the influence of political donations on Queensland politics, the CCC could do that. But obviously the government doesn't have a particularly deep interest in uncovering any of the links between major donations and political decision-making and policy direction. So, yeah, look, thanks for the question, Dan. I hope I've answered it in a useful way for you. Now, time is getting on. We've got about just over 15 minutes left. So, again, if you're still here, good job. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for sticking about. Do keep the questions coming. I'm not sure how many we've got left here. It looks like we've got quite a few, but if you've got something you really want to ask, make sure you get it on there, and I'll endeavour to get to it. And I've got to start answering questions more quickly now, haven't I? Okay. Next question. All right. Question from Gil. Hi, Michael. I read your vision on public housing today. Could you explain how Queensland could be like Vienna? Sounds so good. Thanks, Gil. That's a great question. I mean, first of all, we could move to the Northern Hemisphere. No, but seriously, I guess the point of the question is that Vienna, and Austria is one of these shining examples of where public housing has been done really, really well. Like there's a lot of stigma and negativity associated with social housing in Queensland and in Australia these days. It certainly hasn't always been the case. Social housing was just an accepted part of our social fabric for decades, and particularly coming out of World War II. But Vienna is one of those examples where they've got a crazy population density, like something like 4,000 people per square kilometre compared with Brisbane's 145, 150 or something like that. So it's incredibly densely populated. But 60% of people in Vienna live in public housing. And this is public housing that is beautifully designed, has all sorts of facilities like, rooftop gardens and swimming pools and childcare, kindergartens, medical centres. There is plenty of scope for us to follow that sort of model. I guess the difference is, like in a city like Vienna, we still don't see these massive high-rise developments. And when people talk about, like when we propose things like a massive investment in social housing, the false dichotomy consistently gets thrown up, which is that either, well, what are you going to do? Is it going to be urban sprawl out, clearing bushland outside the city, the urban footprint forever? Or is it going to be, 30-story skyscrapers everywhere? Well, it's complete rubbish. That's totally false dichotomy. those happen to be the development models that are most profitable for developers. But in fact, if you look at some sensible medium density development in the middle, and what our proposal today involved was a cap at 5 stories for social housing, which is enough to remain connected, but still have that really high density that can support better amenity. That's that missing middle, as I've heard it described recently. Apparently that's not a new term, but one I've just heard recently. That's what we need to be focused on, is the possibility of increasing that density in a way that leaves us with better integrated, more vibrant, better functioning communities. Okay, I've spoken about social housing a bit, so thanks for the question, Gil. I'll move on. A question from Elizabeth in Paddington. Do you think the idea of universal basic income may be a way of ensuring that our society can thrive as a whole rather than fracture into the haves and the really have-nothings during this recession? Yeah, look, I guess, again, that's one of these fascinating fallouts from the COVID-19 pandemic and the crisis, is that all of a sudden we're talking, we've seen the government lift New Start payments, or job seeker payments as they're called now, from below the poverty line to something that will actually pay the bills. And similarly, people have started talking about a universal basic income. We're actually seeing this framed as a positive way to lift people out of poverty, and we're moving away from the idea that if you're not working, you don't deserve a good life. You don't deserve a living wage. I think, without really getting too far down into the weeds, I think the discussion around UBI is a really important one. But it's important that we don't just unquestioningly jump on that idea and without really reassessing how we've got to the point of such grave inequality in society. So if we don't address that structural inequality, UBI is not necessarily going to do everything that we might hope it could. But certainly, I guess the space that we're trying to play in here is something that involves a combination of a universal basic income and a jobs guarantee potentially. But yeah, there are a lot of amazing models and fantastic, approaches we can take on our way out of this crisis. But again, the surest thing to come from a crisis like this is change. So look, I'm very excited about that possibility, and thanks for the question. I think, I think it's wonderful to have these ideas kind of bubbling up to the surface. It's perhaps a silver lining of COVID-19 in my mind. Okay, next question. I really got to get a wriggle on now. Question from Nairi. Can you advise your position on pay freeze of public servants in Queensland? Yeah, absolutely. I've been pretty outspoken on this before. The fact of the matter is that this is a long overdue, increment for public servants, and it was not just long overdue, but it was hard negotiated. And in fairness, even if you put aside any of the things I'm going to say next, just in fairness, the government should make good on its commitment to public servants, because we're talking about people here who are, who a lot of whom are right on the front lines. So it doesn't deal with all health professionals who are on the front lines of the pandemic, but a lot of hospital staff and folks who are, doing the contact tracing, and cleaners, and as I understand it, teachers as well. The fact is that after inflation, a pay freeze is a real pay cut. It actually means that relative to your daily expenses, all of those public servants that miss out on that scheduled increment, they're getting a cut in their pay over the next few years. And I think it's a shocking slap in the face. So I've called on the government to not follow through with that decision. To this point, we've not seen them show any indication that they're going to make good on their commitment. But it's, I don't know what to say other than I think it's appalling. And it's equally appalling that we've seen no suggestion from any of our politicians in Queensland, I don't think. No one's made the suggestion that we should take a pay cut, or that, that there should be any impact on police salaries. Instead, we're just attacking this negotiated public service pay rise, which, you know, these are not fat cat workers. These are some of the lower paid public servants who have negotiated this through their unions, and the government should follow through. Look, I think, yeah, I could go on about that a little bit. The short answer is, in amongst all the stimulus that we've seen coming from the federal government, it's just absurd for the state government to not follow through with this. We should see the big end of town. We should see the banks, the profitable banks who are always bailed out if ever they're in trouble. And we should see those mining corporations that have been making hay off our state's resources for so many years. They should be the ones paying to get us through this recovery, not frontline public servants. Okay, look, I'm going to go for just a couple of last questions. Maybe I'll get 2 or 3 more. Question from Alex in Victoria Point. What are the Greens making of the Accord 2.0 job maker announced today by the PM? What would you like to encourage in the vet approach Queensland might try to put forward to the talks they're organising at a federal level? Look, I'll start with a little bit of a mea culpa. Relatively busy day today, so I haven't really delved into the detail of this. And as I understand it, there was this announcement made. We knew it was coming before the PM went and did his presser today, but I really haven't had a chance to drill down into the details since then. I guess there's some suggestion that the government's kind of looking to kill off, workers' power, and we run the risk of flatlining wages there. But look, I guess I'm not gonna mince words and pretend that I can answer this in any meaningful way. But there's been really grave need for an overhaul of the vet sector for a long time now, and I just hope that the Fed this is a co-ag question really, that everyone can come to the party and actually make it a system that works well for those who want training, and actually make it affordable and make it quality. And that's where I'll draw a line under that one, because I'm doing quick answers now. Another question from Gabriella. When are the Greens going to support a green food system and move away from environmentally destructive animal agriculture? Thanks for the question, Gabriella. Look, I guess the short answer is that the Greens do support sustainable agriculture. Mass-produced animal agriculture is, it is bad for the planet, and oftentimes food's produced in unethical ways. So what we actually need to move towards is small scale sustainable agriculture. And there are some excellent organisations doing great work in this space around Brisbane. I mean, many are familiar with, Food Connect is one of those shining examples of an organisation that really walks the talk in terms of sourcing, local high quality produce, and doing it in a way that really supports their farmers, their producers through good times and bad. So another thing, this is just a bit of a thought bubble, but I've been really fascinated at the way, this lockdown, slowing everyone down, keeping people in their homes a bit. I know it's been the case for me. I've finally, got my veggie garden up and running again. We're going to have a killer crop of tomatoes sometime soon. But actually, seeing governments take steps to promote even just that really small scale, individuals at home or community gardens, which we've been working hard to try and promote around the electorate here. There'll be a Taringa community garden, which is on the way soon. Stay tuned for details of that, or get in touch with the office if you want to be involved in that organisation or in another potential community garden project. But look, back to the broader question. It's a tough one, because consumer choice is something that makes a big difference here. But we support, government providing for better education and better financial incentives for good agricultural practice, I suppose. Okay, it's 6:55 now. I'm really running out of time because I do actually need to wrap up. Let me see if there's another short question that I can answer really quickly. And in the process of trying to find a short question. I run the risk of running out of time. Okay, I'm going to go with this one last question from Kathy. Kathy asks, "Hi, Michael. I'm concerned for those in the many casual positions in our community. I'm concerned that for those in the many casual positions in our community, insecurity due to work and pay conditions may see them having no choice but to continue working even when unwell, as they have no backup support financially now or post-September. For example, sick leave entitlements. My question is, what is being done to bring casual and vulnerable workers into a safety net that supports their health and well-being and the health of the community as a whole as we go forward within this era of COVID-19? Well, there's actually a whole lot in that question, Kathy, and it will be the last one for the night. And I'll try not to go on too much, but I guess the starting point is to say that it's really disappointing that the federal government locked so many people out of the JobKeeper program. It's particularly bizarre now to reflect on all those hard limits that they put on it. You know, those casual workers under 12 months, and any visa workers or, you know, international workers for the most part. They were shut out of it, and yet we've now underspent on that program by $60 billion. The mind boggles. And in that context, there's all the more reason for the scheme to be expanded to make sure that those folks are caught and that they're not left out of the scheme and that they're not left wanting at this time, when everyone needs income and security and the economy needs the stimulus as well. So my federal colleagues have been working really hard on this from day one. They've been making the case for expansion of that scheme. And look, I've done what I can to call on the state to fill the gaps in the federal scheme, like other states have done, for example, the NT. Look, there was an interesting case just really very recently. I don't remember when exactly, but maybe even just in the last couple of days, where casual workers had a win in courts where they could demonstrate that they were eligible for sick leave when they had been working effectively full-time hours for a certain period of time, which that is an amazing precedent. And it's really exciting to not just that case, but I'm aware of a local business. They're not local to Maiwar, but they're based over at Kangaroo Point. They've kind of taken some pioneering steps. They're working in the aged care space. They've taken some pioneering steps in terms of the 4-day working week, or the 30-hour working week, as they call it, not just squeezing a full working week into 4 days. But in addition to that, they've also, for all their casual staff, provided not just a loading for your leave entitlements, whether that's sick leave or holiday leave, but actually providing those leave entitlements to casual staff. So there's precedent for it to be done. It can happen, but obviously we can't just rely on, the occasional excellent employer to do the right thing. We do need the government to take steps and make sure that people are provided for. But I think the idea of, when we heard some politicians coming out and talking about casual leave loading as though it was the answer to every gap in people's, for people to deal with getting sick with COVID-19. It really kind of blew open just what a bogus idea it is that leave loading is actually anything like adequate or meets people's needs. I do have to take this opportunity as well to do a quick shout out, as I was going to do at the end anyway, for the, we've got a mutual aid group running online, which is called Westside Helping Hands for COVID-19. So if you know someone, be they a casual worker or international student or anyone who's doing it really tough at the moment and struggling to even put food on the table, please put them in touch with us, because we're doing just what we're calling basics boxes, which we can take to folks around the electorate. And beyond that, the Westside Helping Hands group, if you can offer support of any kind to folks throughout the crisis, or if you need particular help, even other than the basics boxes, just jump on there, tell us what you need or what you can offer, or just get in touch with the office. I won't bother telling you the numbers and email address because it's obviously on the Facebook page that you're watching this on. But look, if anyone who's really struggling, please get in touch. We'll do all we can to help out through what is a really tough time. We're in this kind of weird space now where it does seem like we've managed to avoid the worst of the potential, the health outcomes that could have come with this new virus. But at the same time, we know that the economic impacts are going to have a pretty long tail on them. So, look, I'm about to wrap up, but again, I'll just emphasize, please get in touch. If there's a way we can help, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me in my office. Look, again, thank you for taking the time to tune in, and thanks for all your questions. Look, we will keep doing these for as long as we're constrained by physical distancing requirements and the health directions. We just, obviously, potentially from now through until the election, we just don't know whether there'll be any scope for us to hold larger forums or events as we might like. I don't have a clear sense of when I'll be able to have meetings with constituents in the office or go do the mobile office, the pop-up office at the local coffee shops. But we'll keep doing these, so please stay tuned to the Facebook page and we'll let you know when the next one's coming up. We are, of course, as I said, I think at the start and certainly last time, the office is still closed, at least for the time being, but we're all working from home. Again, I'm going to do a huge shout out to all my staff who I know have just been working like crazy, because the regular work of the electorate office has not gone away, and COVID-19 has created a whole bunch of extra demand for support and information and for help from the office. So huge thanks to everyone beavering away behind the scenes. I'm sure anyone who's engaged with the office recently knows what an incredibly capable and diligent and delightful group of people I'm lucky to work with. Sign up, join the Westside Helping Hands for COVID-19 Facebook group, so you can just keep an eye on what's going there. And also, if you're interested and you haven't already, please sign up to my email list. We send something out not too often, every 2 or 3 weeks. It tends to be 2 weeks at the most. It's more like 3. So if you just Google Michael Berkman, go to the webpage. It's michaelberkman.com.au/get_updates, I think it is. But there's a Get Updates tab. Click on that. Now, just a last couple of bits of information. In the comments to this video, I'll post a couple of links, as I said, to that Productivity Commission report. I'll post the email address in there too, just to simplify that for anyone who wants to get in touch. I'll post a link to the Westside Helping Hands group and also to the government's COVID-19 information hub, which is a good place to get any info about the changing state of play, what we can and can't do. If you've got any questions about what the health directions mean, you can ask them as well, and we can try and help you interpret as we get a bit of help from Parliament to try and make sense of all that stuff. So, all right. Look, 3 minutes over time. That's not too bad. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you again for tuning in. I feel like I'm getting used to this as a way of doing all things, whether it's Zoom meetings or Facebook Live Q&As. I hope it's been a worthwhile evening or hour spent for you. So thanks again. I hope to catch up with you all soon. Cheers. Bye.